Good afternoon from Kingston. This is STARCAST from Planet Waves. I'm Eric Francis Coppolino, your friendly neighborhood astrologer, here with the edition for Wednesday, November 27th. We are sending out the weekly horoscope and STARCAST early this week due to the Thanksgiving holiday, so you now have that in your hands. This reading will be focused, as the horoscope was, on the Sagittarius new moon that is overnight, Thursday to Friday. It takes place at 1:21 a.m. Eastern Time on Friday morning. Before we go there, and I follow up on Mercury retrograde, which I think began on Monday, and get to the new moon chart, just a couple of housekeeping announcements. First, I'm planning to do Sagittarius Studio shortly after finishing this program. It took me a little longer than planning. My problem was I wasn't catching a good night's sleep, and I finally got one last night. Sometimes that can be a little bit difficult with a mind as restless as mine, but I got a good night's sleep and was up early and will be doing your reading. These readings are different than, like, for example, a podcast or a radio program, because they are so personally directed, and the information, I think, is taken in at a deeper level by those clients, as opposed to something that is really a general reading without any signs or rising signs involved. No, in other words, no specific recipient and specific growth matters. Of course, all of my astrology does take that viewpoint, but I'm sure you understand what I mean, that doing a reading intended for someone at the time of their birthday is different from this kind of thing. So anyway, that will happen. Planning to have that out. It could be out already by the time you're listening to this. So check your email for the announcement. This will be going to all purchasers of Sagittarius Studio Backstage Pass holders, now called the Astrology Pass and Galaxy Pass holders. Thank you all for your business and your trust. Work on the awakening continues. I am now into the seventh reading. That would be Libra. I've got that pretty much breathing on its own right now. This is the second hemisphere of the zodiac. I've just been through the first 6 signs. Those are all into the copy team for proofreading and correction. And this year, unlike any other year, I'm not including a reference reading with the readings. Usually I include an extra sign for everyone, but what I've done is I've written a little ebook which goes through the astrology pretty thoroughly and in my usual adventurous format. And so that is coming along. I'll have more on that beginning pretty soon after Thanksgiving. I'll be doing a series of podcasts that talk about 2025 astrology and give you a sense of what is going into these readings. As I've said a number of times, this is absolutely extraordinary astrology. I'm actually aiming it at kind of focusing on the vanishing point or the singularity point of March 19th, 2026, which is one of the contacts of Chiron and Eris, the third of 3. This is a very rare conjunction, has not happened since the early 1970s, which was, of course, a tumultuous time and also a very rich time of personal growth and evolution for anyone who lived through it. So keep an eye out for that as well, and more information. The Awakening, the 2025 annual, is still available at the lowest price. The price will go up after this weekend. It's still $122 for all 12 signs. That is less than $12 per sign. Each one takes me about 12 hours to do the writing and the audio. All right, planning Planet Waves FM for Friday evening. It is the new moon. The program is now on a new moon, full moon schedule with supplemental programs distributed in between. But right now I'm going to stick to the full moon, new moon pattern. And I'll be doing a different reading of the new moon chart, talking also a little bit about 2025 astrology. in the introduction. And then for the issues I'll be covering, it would appear that the so-called trans movement is beginning to admit that it has pushed this issue too far and gotten in people's faces and all of that. They're not saying anything about what is being done to prepubescent boys and girls, but I'll have more to say about that, and also some of my understandings of what this is really about. It is not about sex. It's not about gender. It's not about sexuality. It is about something else. Additionally, it was revealed this week in a paper out of Argentina that 55 previously undisclosed chemical elements were found in the COVID-19 vaccines from all of the brands except Janssen. And I'm going to talk about how those were found, the analytical method that was used, and what the implications are, for example, of zinc, lead, and arsenic turning up in what are supposed to be preparations for a vaccine against a virus. I will have a tribute to Michael Lutin, the great astrologer from New York City who passed several weeks ago, as well as one for Jeffrey Cornelius, one of my teachers and a friend who died over the summer, and I'll talk about the contributions that both of those men made to astrology. And I will also have a special treat for Philip K. Dick fans, which is a reading of PKD's chart. I have started reading Philip K. Dick novels. Someone in my audience sent me an entire box of PKD novels at some point, and one day I went looking for them and I couldn't find them, and then so I started picking them up one at a time, and it has been a mind-opening experience. This is a writer after my own heart, and he was a true visionary, and he saw coming what we are now living with, which is essentially the world turning into an android indistinguishable from human. That was the theme of many of the earlier Dick novels, say, for example, from the 1960s, where he was concerned with what he knew was on its way, which was a kind of an android revolution, and the problem of people developing empathy for robots. Okay, so that's all on Friday night's Planet Waves FM. Let's take a look at the current astrology. I want to follow up briefly on my Mercury retrograde presentation from last week. That's open access for everyone. You can hear that if you want. It's right on the front page at planetwaves.eu. That is the shortcut to the Planet Waves Substack. Again, planetwaves.eu. A funny story behind how we got that domain, that top-level domain for Europe. That was back when I was living in Belgium. And Mark on Jonathan Kaner's team helped me acquire that and generously gave the domain to Planet Waves. Anyway, so I mentioned quite a bit about Mercury retrograde and some of the backstory on how to understand what Mercury retrograde is and not to get caught up in the kind of typical internet, half-baked, meekly informed information about Mercury retrograde. And so there's quite a bit in that short 25-minute podcast from earlier in the week, STARCAST properly. What we have this week is, Mercury is retrograde, and it is heading into a square with Saturn and an opposition with Jupiter. And this is a big deal. Unfortunately, this is going to be a slightly more mentally tense Mercury retrograde than the one over the summer in August, which had a kind of an easygoing quality to it. Although this one is more of a keep your awareness on and think carefully. I mean, we are so overwhelmed with so-called information coming at us that it becomes very difficult to filter it out. And in the days previously when You may have been familiar with my news theory and my general concept of staying informed. There has been a complete revolution in information transmission and the transmission technology in the years that I have been doing Planet Waves, and it has got to the point where it would seem that you are better informed not paying attention to anything. A lot of the people that you think are the most informed presenters, I do not want to mention names. Well, no, I do want to mention names, so I'm not going to mention names, but they're, for example, health freedom presenters and people talking about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is basically the complete takeover by digital technology, who really think they know what they're talking about. But once I've caught someone lying, and I've caught most of these people blatantly lying, I find no use in listening to them, because there's no way to know if they are not deceiving the public on the issues that I don't understand. And so my standard for presenters is I wait until they do a story about something that I know a lot about. And maybe there's 5 or 10 subjects that over the years I have acquired a lot of information on, and I've done the story myself. And I evaluate how they handle something that I know well. And when I find them deceiving the public, and when I'm also aware of the history of that deception, forget it. And the problem is that almost all of the health freedom presenters, and this includes many of the presenters doing these things on Fourth Industrial Revolution and Internet 3.0 and central bank digital currency and all that, they may be onto something, but I think that they're missing the main story. So all of this is apropos of Mercury retrograding into a square to Saturn, a square to Nessus, and an opposition to Jupiter. Now, what is especially interesting in this, and I forgot to mention this last time, is that Jupiter is in Gemini and Mercury is in Sagittarius. Anyone familiar with basic astrology knows that Mercury rules Gemini and Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So what happens when you have not only both planets located in one another's opposite signs, but both planets retrograde and both planets in a series of exact aspects? Well, that is a very powerful mutual reception. And the mutual reception part is just merely occupying one another's signs, but the kind of score goes up on mutual receptions the closer the aspect they make, and then they've both got this unusual property of being retrograde. We seeing this also in, let's just keep it there. Now, there are a few ways to understand mutual receptions. One of them is to consider them as planets representing people who are perhaps better able to see one another's point of view. They are better able to switch roles, because it is a switching roles kind of a thing. And you can actually read Mercury in the position of Jupiter and Jupiter in the position of Mercury. It's a little like castling in chess, but even cooler, because there's not a limit to once per game. It's rare, but there may be several mutual receptions in a chart. But also, it enables you to consider another set of possibilities. Normally, you wouldn't say, well, I'm looking at Mercury in Sagittarius. What does it mean if Jupiter's there? Well, we'll consider that. Maybe it means, there's a lot of insinuation of false knowledge in this setup. The false knowledge is coming from, first of all, Jupiter in a sign opposing the rulership, Mercury in the sign opposing its rulership, and both planets being retrograde, and then the general caution of the square to Saturn. We're in a very important time right now of the Jupiter-Saturn square. That is this sense of desperation that we are feeling. That is the sense that we are at this last chance. It's now or never. Now, I realize that it depends on how sensitive you are. Often feels like we are in this last chance, now or never. Talk of the imminent collapse of the world has been going on since the pilgrims were coming to the New World from Europe, fleeing religious persecution, because many of the original, I don't know if they were quite exactly pioneers, but settlers in the New World wanted to be someplace besides Europe for the second coming of Jesus. So that's how a lot of people got here, in the early days, 16th century, 17th century, when there was a lot of immigration coming. People were fleeing religious persecution in Europe. So the end is nigh has been, it's just gone on and on for hundreds of years. I wasn't around at the turn of the previous millennium when it became 1000 AD, but I'm sure there was plenty of this going on. And, this is like a lot of hype, basically. Now, we are certainly in dire straits. I agree with that. And we're in a situation, though, that was not really foreseen in any biblical prophecy that I know of, which is that we are experiencing being seized. The human race is being seized by the technology that it has created. This is a very weird situation. According to Conversations with God, Book 3, it has only happened one other time in known human history. Now, human history goes back a long time. Quote unquote, God is supposedly the source of this. It is, after all, a conversation with God that Neil Donald Walsh claimed to have had. But nonetheless, they're talking about Atlantis. And so the myth of the civilization that falls under the weight and the corruption and the spiritual breakdown of its own technology is not a new story. J.R.R. Tolkien handles this in the Silmarillion in a section called Akalabeth, The Downfall of Numenor, worth listening to. And we used to have a copy of that bootleg posted to a website. See if anybody else has done that. Akalabeth, The Downfall of Numenor. And what was going on in Numenor, which was the equivalent of Atlantis, is that humans were usurping the power of God. They wanted the immortality of the gods, and so they attempted to conquer the gods. It was not a technological breakdown in Tolkien's telling of the story. It was a spiritual breakdown and a confrontation with mortality, kind of a false confrontation with mortality. And that is something else. That is something else that is going on now. I mean, they have this plan to send people to Mars is something like that, and I suspect that there are very powerful life-extending drugs that are not talked about, that are not known about, that are used, which is why you see someone like Henry Kissinger live to whatever he lived to, 100 years old. People do live that long, but it's unusual. So, where was I? Let's see. False information. So there are a lot of false prophets on the internet right now, and I would say that you don't need to listen to them. I mean, you can listen to them, but the problem is you don't have the energy to fact check them, and I don't have the energy to fact check them, and I don't intend to do so. But where I find that I have the deepest concerns is when people speak with absolute certainty, and they don't leave any room for other interpretations or to be wrong. They just they get three people on the same Zoom call who all seem to agree about something, and they call it they call it a panel, and then because all three people agree, then most people watching it assume, well, this must really be what's going on. This must be the bottom line, and that's kind of a false consensus. So I would urge caution, and I know that a lot of you are really concerned about the future and concerned about the central bank digital that is connected to the ID system and all of that. Well, I have a suggestion for you. Don't opt in. It's all going to start with opt-ins. It's all going to start seemingly, or in reality, optional. It could be coerced in various ways. We have to be ready for that. But there's going to be quite a few people who just have this as an opt-in. They can do it. You convert your bank account to central bank digital currency. There you go, and you'll get a $1,000 bonus if you do it or something like this. Well, you don't have to do it. And that's how it's going to start, as far as I'm concerned. And we don't know when. This is a very, very complicated situation, and I don't think it's anything that is imminent. What I will say is that really we are not in a battle for our money. We are in a struggle for our souls. This is really the robot that we are being confronted by. Okay, I have digressed a bit from the astrology. So we have this mutual reception between Jupiter and Mercury, which to me is saying beware of false information. Run things through very tight filters and ask yourself why you need that so-called information. This is really the first check. Like, what am I going to do with this data? How exactly is this helping me besides feeding my anxiety? And the anxiety shows up in retrograde Mercury square Saturn. It shows up in retrograde Jupiter square Saturn. It shows up in Saturn in Pisces. And it shows up as we stand today on the cusp of many, many different planetary sign changes. At least 3 major sign changes that I know of in 2025. Saturn's changing signs, Neptune's changing signs, and Uranus is changing signs. And over the past 2 years, many of the minor planets that I may not have mentioned or mentioned them periodically only have also changed signs. But these 3 major planets, 2 outer planets, and Saturn changing signs, well, that is an invitation to anxiety. And so that's really the problem more than anything, is the consumption of your creative bandwidth, the consumption of your trust, the consumption of your ability to love and to feel and to remember that children need to be taken care of and that people who you don't imagine need to be taken care of need to be taken care of, and that you may require help, that you have to have the empathy for yourself to ask for. All of this is what is being consumed by this digital takeover. Okay, let's just take a brief look at the Sag New Moon chart. I've gone a little bit long on my philosophical theorizing here. But there's a special thing in this chart that I noticed today, and I sometimes cast these charts and draw them out many times, and I did this again today for the Sag New Moon chart for 1:21 in the morning on Thanksgiving. There's a grand quintile. There is a pentagram in this chart, an exact pentagram, and I have published the copy of the chart that has that pentagram shown. You can see that the 72-degree aspect is indicated by a Q. That's called a quintile, and you can see they form the exact shape of a pentagon in there. And this is an aspect of creativity. It is an aspect of talent development and creative drive. And it's going to be a big factor in the Sagittarius reading. Of course, it makes much more sense in a personal chart of personal development. But the planets involved in this are the Mars-Vulcanus conjunction. That's in Leo. Mars is stationary retrograde. It goes retrograde in about 1 week. So Mars is very slow and very powerful, and conjunct this thing called Vulcanus. That's 1 point. And then there's a second conjunction, again, involving minor planets. It's the Vesta Black Moon Lilith conjunction. That's something I could write a book about, probably say more on Friday. The third point is Pallas Athene, the asteroid of politics and strategy. The fourth point is Saturn, and the fifth point is Uranus. So all of those are in one aspect pattern, perfectly connected in the form of a pentagon or pentagram. Either way, it'll work either way. That always evokes Venus, because Venus itself runs in a pentagonal shape in the sky. That is the origin of the 5-pointed star being the symbol of goddess religion. It's just copied right out of the sky because Venus moves in these little 72-degree swoops. So that's going on, and the new moon, consistent with the quintile pattern, is conjunct Urania. This is an asteroid strongly associated with the power of invention. While we're at it, Venus is pushing on Eris. There's a little bit of chaos there. There again, another one of these things saying that there is anxiety, and there is anxiety on the material level, because that's almost always where Venus kind of lodges when not guided to a more emotional level or more creative level or more sexual level or more peace-loving kind of dimension of thought. It will end up being a kind of worrisome thing about resources, and we put it in square to Eris. This is just a fear of instability and chaos. And I want to just close by saying that this fear of instability and chaos, it certainly has a basis in truth, but the reason for that is because the world is being made so unstable by the people who have the ability to not make it be unstable, to solve problems rather than to constantly create them, but instead the problems are being created, and whether this is diversionary or whether it is purely an element of just creating chaos to make profit really doesn't matter. All the people who could make it better are basically failing to do so, and worse than that, they are actively instigating crisis and chaos. And it seems like there's just some new crisis, some new source of chaos every single day. And I think that while it's not going to solve the whole digital problem, it is very important to seek information where you know it to be reliable, and to seek information that you need. It really has to be like not eating everything in the entire supermarket. Most of the things in the supermarket are not good for you, and you have no need to bring them home in your basket, but they're all kind of glowing at you in bright colors, and on sale here and on sale there, and 3 for 1 and all of this, Campbell's tomato soup. Why do you need the things that you need to know? Well, the reason you may think you need certain things is because they are distracting you from something more intimate, something more inwardly focused, something more personally necessary. And the level of personal necessity and the general field of individual growth now is no longer a luxury. Oh, I'm going to become enlightened and everything will be wonderful. It's now a matter of both individual survival and species level survival, and the survival of our relationships. I mean, the survival is not like everyone dying all at once. Survival is, well, how is your life going to be? How is your life going to be in the context of the people around you? Are you going to be able to live in some way that is loving and that is creative? Or if you're just surviving, are you going to be able to get from a space of barely surviving or just barely getting through the day to a place where you're more stable and you have more options open? The more people who are in crisis, the more all of society is in crisis. And I realize it's not easy to talk about this, and particularly Americans have a way of just wanting to put on a happy face and move on to the next subject. But the subject now, I think that we must address, is taking care of our spiritual health individually and collectively. All right, that's what I've got for you now. I'm going to move on to onto the Sagittarius studio. I will publish a preview of that when soon after the reading is done, and then I'll be back to the Libra reading. That has come out beautiful. I had to scrap the whole thing yesterday and start all over again, which is what you do as a writer when you just don't like the direction something's taking. I just copied it into a file, tagged it outtakes, and started over again, and came out much better the second time. All right, thank you for listening to Planet Waves, reporting in on a beautiful, cold, mostly clear late autumn afternoon. I'm Eric Francis Coppolino. Lots of love, and bye for now.